Hello and welcome to your weekly Premier Injuries podcast, where we discuss all things to do with injuries in the Premier League. We give insights to player injuries with the knowledge on return times and cutting through rumour or misinformation. Plus we talk tactics and data of players who have gone out injured or are returning to their teams. This will be at the same time every Thursday through the season, so if you have any inquiries, you can comment below or tweet any of us. And also, before we get started on the analysis of the big stories of the week so far, please remember to like, share and subscribe to the channel. It's free. Why would you not do it? And we've got so much good content over here. But as always, I welcome Raj back onto the show. How are you doing today?
Not too shabby. How about yourself?
I'm in a good mood because Arsenal won and we look fairly decent, and I'm sure you expressed the kind of same gratitude that we actually have 3 points and a goal for once. But would you say it was a good performance?
Yeah, I think absolutely, especially when you're missing, well, not missing, but Partey and ESR didn't play the majority of the match. And so I thought on balance, it was a good performance and one that was badly needed just to get some of the momentum going, the team confidence going.
And then, as always, Ben, it is a pleasure talking to you. I don't need to welcome you on because obviously this is both of our podcasts, but are you keeping well as well? And do you even want to talk about Newcastle?
No, doing well. Move on.
So let's get into the discussion points of this game week. And we have to start off with the big one. It's Harvey Elliot, his injury. Ben, can you give us the latest information into what happened to him?
I mean, latest information as of Liverpool provided an update. I think it was late on Tuesday evening to confirm that Harvey Elliot had successfully undergone ankle surgery, although the precise nature of what actually occurred hasn't been revealed. I'm sure Raj will touch upon that in a little bit more detail into the possibilities of looking at the mechanism of injury and what may have happened. What we do know, and I tweeted at the time of the injury, because when you see these things in slow motion with the cameras, it can look pretty horrific. You know, the default for everybody is it's season over. Even here, there's some suggestion on the Twitter rumour mill that his career over, his career ending, and this, that, and the other. And I mentioned at the time, you know, there's two recent examples of players who potentially could have suffered similar types of injury during this period. One being Andre Gomez, who had a return to play within 120 days, so just a little over 3.5 months. Which suggested, again, if Harvey Elliott was anything close to that, he would be back early in 2022. And at the other end of the spectrum, we have sort of Wesley Fofana, who suffered a fractured dislocation, but also incorporated a fractured fibula. And we do know that he is ruled out until next year at the very earliest. So there was that little bit of grey area about, the extent of that problem. But again, the update from Liverpool, while they're not given any kind of definitive timeline, they are fairly confident and optimistic that should that rehab and recovery program go fairly smoothly, then Harvey Elliott will be back this season.
Yeah, Raj, talk us through this then. Why is the injury maybe not as bad as people saw on the TV and initially were really worried for Harvey Elliott?
Well, it's not as bad because it looks really bad, right? You see the ankle going the wrong way. So naturally, you're thinking it's extremely severe injury. But in this case, like Ben touched on, typically return to play here, is that 3.5 to 4 month to 6 month. That variance really depends on the severity of ligament damage and the fracture. Liverpool may have given a hint in that medical release where they said they repaired a fracture singular and ligaments plural. So the fact that there's only one fracture may hint at, maybe a good sign. Whereas for Fofana, there were multiple ligaments worse than they thought, and also multiple fractures, which then makes sense with that longer return to play. And so, I mean, the big thing here, there's going to be that gray area until you start to get those updates from his rehab process and how quickly he's coming along. And that is really going to give us far more of a true indicator than just guessing. So,
And can you kind of say, for the rumour mill, for any possible misinformation, a time frame where you think people should disregard any news that, oh, Harvey Elliott's close to returning? Because I remember with you and with Ben, you kind of released quite a few videos explaining Van Dijk is doing X, but he's nowhere near to returning to the field. And this is going to be inevitable, that building up to
yeah.
Elliot's return. So where's the kind of cut-off point, do you think, realistically, where you can say he might return, but until you know the full information, there's no chance before that?
I mean, I would say, I mean, like for example, with Gomez, he returned to team training in 89 days, so 3 months. So right around that 2.5 month mark is where I would be looking to see where he's at. And really, let's say he's doing on pitch training. Is he doing multi-directional training, right? Rather than people always get excited to see a player come on the pitch. He could be just walking on the pitch in a straight line, and people are like, oh, he's close to returning. And so you want to see what they're exactly doing. So I would say around that 2.5 month mark could be a good indicator.
And Ben, because it's Liverpool FC, do you think that it's going to be a little bit more clearer than with other clubs? We've talked in the past about maybe Manchester City, who are a bit more cloak and dagger about these situations. Do you think that people will be well informed about when Harvey Elliott is likely to return?
I mean, Liverpool will tell us and release information, exactly what we want to know, first and foremost. And a lot of that might be done in agreement, in conjunction with the player himself. Harvey Elliott is fairly active on social media. He was releasing updates via his Instagram account. So I'm thinking he'd probably be fairly open to the recovery and rehab process along the way. That's a good way of just keeping a player engaged, keeping him on track, keeping his finger on the pulse and giving him that motivation to work his way back. But I do recall going back to the Andre Gomez situation and this return to play and almost having the conversation, well, yeah, he's back on the pitch within 120 days, but does that mean that Andre Gomez or Harvey Elliott is fully fit and ready to play? Not necessarily. And what are the long-term implications of this injury? And hopefully with him being a little bit younger, then he will be able to, Liverpool may want to protect Harvey Elliott, given, his age, and given the fact that up until this season, he was a relatively unknown in the Premier League in terms of that first team. And again, we're looking at other players and positions. You've got your Thiagos who can come in. You've got your Curtis Jones, your Hendersons, your Keitahs, your Oxlade-Chamberlain. So is there a need, again, to really rush Harvey Elliott back? And, there could be a decision within, those conversations, certainly within Liverpool, about, well, we may want to hold Harvey Elliott back just that little bit to protect him in the long term.
And is there data to talk about in this situation then, a risk of return? Because quite often when we talk about other injuries, an ACL or something, there's quite a high likelihood of re-injury. Is this something that will have to be factored in with his process of being brought back into the team?
So and we've just discussed timelines. So there's almost like a common myth now, or there's certainly a shift. When we talk about return to play and we're talking 2.5, 3 or 4 months, that's not really the case. What we're doing is we're maybe just giving a timeline to people to understand. A lot of the recovery process now are task-based activities. So there will be almost a checklist of exercises that the player must undertake and pass without reaction before they can move on to the next phase of that recovery. Now, that may take player A 3 weeks to do a phase. It may take somebody else 6 weeks, which is why clubs are a little bit reluctant, to pin down a specific time frame or timeline on a player recovering from injury. And of course, with any long-term serious problem, that's rarely without its little issues and niggles and setbacks. So by the time Harvey Elliott comes to the point where he is ready to return to play, he would have been through all of those processes. And of course, football is a contact sport, and you can never be, 100% certain that when he walks out on the pitch, he won't suffer a setback or have another injury. But he should be in a fairly good place in terms of both, psychologically and physiologically to be able to cope with returning to play within the Premier League.
I'm going to throw this to both of you, but I'll start off with Raj. Do you think that Harvey Elliott's injury is another example of something that Klopp has spoken about himself, that the new robust rules of allowing slightly more contact in the sport? Do you think that this could have been avoided if referees and the sport was not almost encouraging a more physical style of play?
I mean, yeah, we've touched on this before. I mean, we've seen it now with Fofana. We saw it with Elliot. We saw it even with Partey's injury. The same type of slide tackle from behind, and the trail leg catches you, right? Kind of in that scissoring action. And so we're seeing that allowed more and more. And in this case, the card is only given due to the injury, in my opinion. I don't think it's given due to the actual challenge. And so you're incentivizing these challenges and putting players at risk. And for me, it's the same thing we touched on about before. The risk reward to me on these challenges just to open up play doesn't make sense. There's plenty of other ways you can encourage free flowing play without incentivizing these types of challenges, right? For one, don't call all the flopping or players falling down and things of that nature, right? Cut that out. But these are, really, really risky plays. I don't understand the need to allow them to this degree.
I mean, Ben, do you have anything to add to that? Should tackles from behind be outlawed?
I think, tackles from behind are, and that it's just a slight softening of the rules in recent times. I remember any tackle. I think I'm going back to maybe World Cup, was it 2010? Maybe South Africa. Any tackle from behind was an instant yellow card, regardless of whether the player won the ball. It was just outlawed, and then that harsh line almost just eradicated everything, and then it slowly crept back into the game, and almost this softening of the rules is being brought about not by Joe Public, not by the supporters, not by the fans saying, we want this. It just seems to be one of those decisions from the powers that be, from the Football Association, from the Referees Association, or maybe even the Premier League. Let's try and make this more entertaining, more free-flowing. Let's have less interruptions. And it's going to be ultimately to the detriment of the game when we're losing players to serious long-term injuries. And also, the likes of Pascal Struijk now will spend 3 games on the sidelines after having his red card appeal rejected. Ultimately, the players still don't really know where this line is. There's too much of a grey area. So ultimately, within the parameters of the game and gamesmanship and pushing, and the risk reward is so great, and there's a vast cavern between the winners and the losers, players will continue to push that boundaries until they know for sure what is right, what is wrong, and what they can get away with and what they can't.
And I think at the moment the rules are so ambiguous that they don't know what's right and what's wrong. And the fact that Leeds actually appealed the red card as well shows that, maybe technically they had a leg to stand on because he won the ball and with that situation. But the rules have just been made far more complicated, not easier, and it isn't for the safety of the players. Let's move. Oh well, Raj, go on. What's the final comment?
What to Ben, and your point about the inconsistency of application, right? The challenge by Tarkowski, 2 legs, doesn't even get ball, no card given. Xhaka comes in 2 feet, gets ball first, red card given. So it's like, where is, and it's not even an Arsenal thing, it could be with any player. That one player's, they're both 2-footed. One actually wins the ball, one gets no ball, but the player who wins the ball gets the most severe penalty possible, whereas the other one gets no penalty. So, and I believe it was the same official. So it's like, where again, we know what is what, as a player, you really don't know what's going to happen. Like Ben said, players are incentivized to keep pushing the boundary until you're slapped on the wrist, right? And the problem becomes, in the meantime, you have players suffering these big injuries.
And I suppose as well, kind of adding to that, is we were talking about the Andre Gomez situation. Wasn't Son's red card rescinded in a similar fashion to what Leeds wanted to happen? So again, even at the higher level there, you'd say, well, referees in the match, they might make a mistake because of the pressure, but then post-match, a rescinding of the red card gives the wrong message again. So yeah, it's a worrying situation there. Let's move it though to Newcastle. I know you didn't want to talk about their results, Ben, but we do have to talk about some of their players. The main man, Callum Wilson himself, still has a fairly worrying injury situation, and there's quite a lot of injuries at the moment for Newcastle, adding to the problems. Can you talk us through that?
I mean, the Wilson one is the biggest concern, and the confusion around a potential return arises from basically Steve Bruce, first and foremost. To go back to game week 3, we had a problem where Wilson complained of a little discomfort in his thigh in and around that 10th, 11th minute. Following discussions with the medical department, felt that he was okay to continue. He played on to around the 69th, 70th minute and came off. That issue, which had been exacerbated during the game, certainly wasn't remedied or rectified over the international break. And we heard how Steve Bruce said ahead of last weekend's trip to Old Trafford that Callum Wilson was out. There was no timeline. He's training away from the group in the gym. That's fine. Saturday comes out and he says, well, yeah, he might be on the grass towards the end of next week, and there's an outside chance that he could maybe make the Leeds game. Fast forward to Monday, and David Ornstein comes out and he said, look, I've been told by sources close to the club that, we may be looking at a return after the international break. Now, you can maybe forgive managers understanding slight variances in return to play and where a player is, but we're talking about maybe a 2, 3, or potentially 4 week. I've since had conversations myself around what we would expect maybe Callum Wilson, and what I'm being told is or what I was told, and not so many words, don't expect to see many goals at St James's Park in the very near future. So read into that what you may. So that certainly leans more towards what David Ornstein had been saying in that potential return. And the frustrating thing as a supporter, first and foremost, is what you want. Yeah, look, it's all smoke and mirrors, but don't treat the supporters and your fans as if they're stupid. You can't say one thing 1 minute, another the next, and expect in this day and age with social media and with people so closely associated with clubs and people, that the news isn't going to get out. That is my real bugbear. Downright blatant lies. I cannot stand it. Pep does it. There are very few managers who actually do it, but in this instance, I'm sorry, I have to call Steve Bruce out on that one because it doesn't look like Callum Wilson is anywhere near that first team squad for the league's game.
So Raj, looking at that information there, obviously Ben has kind of explained that not all the information from Newcastle has been helpful. So what can you kind of deduce from that situation? What kind of injury are we looking at with Callum Wilson?
I mean, you're looking at a higher grade injury than either earlier they thought it would be, or something that evolved into. With a lot of these injuries, you can't often tell at the start just how they might evolve or how bad they are. And so over time, you see how the player responds to treatment, how they respond to progressions. And it gives you a better idea. I mean, we're all kind of in the dark on it, so it's hard to say what it is. But I agree with Ben in that there are certain managers like Bruce, like Pep, who very, very vague. And I just think it's unnecessary. I don't understand the point of it, right? To go to that extreme and be like, the player might be back when in fact they're going to be missing 3 to 4 weeks. Like, I bet if Pep was the manager for Liverpool, he would have said Harvey Elliot may or may not have an ankle injury.
Is it really that extreme? You know, you two are obviously more attuned with me. I'm more focused on the data and the stats of like players and the tactics. Is it really that frustrating for both of you that Newcastle, Man City, the information coming out for them is sometimes confusing?
For me, the lies drive me crazy. Just come out and say, look, I don't know where he is. I've never spoke to the medical department. We will see this weekend. You know, but just don't lie. Dress it up, hide it, or do whatever. What I feel to, as supporters, as fans, you think, right, it's all smoke and mirrors, and what we're hearing is maybe he doesn't want to play his hand, reveal it to the opposition. Look, every medical department within the Premier League, they all know each other. All of the players know each other. They pick up the phone and they text, is Callum Wilson playing this weekend? No, mate, he isn't. Is he? But Steve Bruce, no, mate, he's nowhere near the training pitches. He's in the gym. They're not pulling the wood over. So any opposition manager that tells you that they're not aware of what's going on with every player in every single club is a lie. Because you see the WhatsApp conversation, you see them all in the fantasy football leagues. They have the conversation. The medical departments move from club to club. Players are moving from club to club. So if you want to find out, you know, you will find out. So this is just for the benefit of the media or supporters or you know, yeah, it's lost. Why lie? It's drives us crazy.
Why lie?
Yeah, and I think it also makes a lot of people question the medical department a lot of times. We're like, well, the manager said he's supposed to be back Monday. How come he's not back? Is it the medical department? Is it the training department? So why put that unnecessary pressure on them? I think we used to see that as before this latest regime at Arsenal, we saw a lot of this as well. Whereas now they just trying to tell you straight up. And I think it helps fans understand, hey, this player may or may not be back, right? And so it just puts undue pressure for no reason. And like Ben said, now, this isn't the Stone Ages anymore. You're not able to hide that information. It's very easily defined for clubs, other clubs, managers, and players. They're all interlinked now. So why do it? That's what I don't understand. Why even? I just don't understand why.
So maybe let's answer some other questions on why or what or who or where or when in terms of DCL. Dominic Calvert Lewin came into this game week. He did have question marks over him. I don't think it was too much of a surprise that he missed out. So I think a lot of people in the community need to know or want to know what is happening with him and will he return to play as quickly as Benitez is saying, Ben?
I mean, first and foremost, there was no mention from Rafa during Friday's press conference. Any mention of DCL was taken straight off the agenda. We do know that he had been managing an ongoing toe problem, a fracture, and then he also came out of game week 3 with an issue with his thigh. But, and as we've talked about before, we've seen pictures from the training pitches. DCL was part of those full sessions, and everybody assumed, everybody's an expert, DCL's fine, and he would be part of that squad on Monday against Burnley. The caveat, Everton had at least another 2 days of training before that game on the Saturday and the Sunday. So we had to assume or hope that DCL would come through that. But also we knew that up until, maybe game week 3, Everton didn't really have any kind of backup in place for Dominic Calvert Lewin. The transfer window changed that. We've seen the arrival of Solomon Rondon at Goodison Park, and that almost gave Rafa the opportunity to sit DCL out and say, well, actually, we want to protect you for the longevity of the season and not just have these short-term patch you up, get you out, manage you, we want you at 100%, not 70 or 80% because he hadn't been training to maximum capacity. And so this is an opportunity again just to take DCL out of the firing line in the comfort and knowledge, knowing that you've got Richarlison, you've got Rondon, you've got Everton who are playing some pretty decent football and getting the results. And the pressure of taking them out the firing line isn't as great as maybe as it possibly could have been.
So Raj, is this going to be a situation? Well, before we go into it, Ben, what is the time frame actually for DCL coming back? Do we know that at least?
Possibly, 2 to 3 weeks, hopeful. If not, a return after the international break. So what the official line is.
So what does that suggest to you then, Raj, with the kind of toe break situation? What kind of information can you glean from that?
I mean, it sounds like it could be one of two things. It could be either something where it's a grade 2, quad strain, thigh strain, which has kind of like that 2 to 3 week return to play, or it's a grade 1 injury and they're just being very conservative because he also has the toe injury and they saw him pick up that quad injury after the toe injury. So there's being conservative with his return timeline. And then again, speaking to what Ben said, my favorite term, risk reward, they're playing well. They have good replacements for him. So why rush him back at the start of the season and potentially endanger his entire season? Because with some of these injuries, if they start to add up, they're very hard to dig yourself out of, especially during the season. So sometimes you just need that hard break to be able to recover the right way and then, come back at 100%.
And will that toe injury heal in that time as well? Is that also why he might be rested?
Yeah, we don't know the full details, but yeah, it should be by that point. The fact that he was playing through it with a toe injury tells me that it wasn't all that serious in the first place, but that should be healed up relatively well at that point.
And so kind of going forward, Ben, do you think that almost enables DCL even more as an option? Because he will be 100% fit, as you said there. He'll be looking sharp, he'll be looking fresh, and he'll have a lot of training in his legs. He'll have a really good level of fitness. Does that almost make him a more attractive prospect when he's fit and ready?
I mean, you say that because ultimately what we do know, that pre-season block of training is paramount. That forms the cornerstone. And there's an argument, regardless of what training is done between games, that actually, unless you're playing, you ultimately become at incremental levels are becoming more deconditioned as the season goes on. You cannot quite replicate, we've got League Cup coming up, I'm thinking with Everton, but are they be able to get those sessions in on the training pitches? Are they able to replicate those maximal force sessions in between games? Probably not, because you're going to have post-match recovery strategies, you're going to have pre-match build-up. If you speak to medical professionals in the game that I've spoke to, they actually feel that there isn't enough of that high intensity training going on between games because managers, coaches, staff are overly protective and far too concerned that they push their players too hard that they may break down. And therefore, if you're not in that starting 11 and you're not getting in those minutes, then you're one of those players who are sort of fallen by the wayside. Now, it could be that once DCL comes back and is ready, it may be that it may be 3, 4, 5 games before he gets that level of sharpness and conditioning back into, and just getting the feel of playing in the Premier League again.
So you'd actually urge almost caution for the first few games before bringing him back in?
I mean, absolutely. There's no guarantees, and we haven't seen any sort of return to play data or return to performance data, and that's something that we may look at in this instance. But we could be looking with the international break. It may be another 4, possibly 5 weeks before we see Calvert Lewin back in starting maybe for Everton. And, we know it's a handful of days. And then, ultimately you're losing your fitness. If you're not training that level of intensity, if you're, and it depends. And this is something that I learned by talking to Phil Haywood down at Wolves. And he talked about how they kept their fringe players really fit and really sharp. And he said the emphasis, and it was huge, and I never really understood the importance or appreciated, was the value of an under 23 squad and having those players who are able to step into the first team. So those players who can reach a level and an intensity which can bring on those fringe first team players. Because if you don't have that infrastructure in place and you have, the likes of maybe DCL training with the under 18s and under 23 players who maybe aren't ready to make that step up, then they're never going to be able to bridge that gap. And that can only be made once they've returned back to the Premier League, which, like I say, isn't ideal.
So let's continue the conversation on another possible injury. There's no confirmation, there's nothing there, but Marcelo Bielsa is known as somebody who's very secretive and doesn't discuss these things at all for reasons that we've discussed many times, Ben. It is quite interesting. But Patrick Bamford, a lot of people were putting on social media, he was complaining about a hamstring ping. I mean, what is the medical definition of a pinging hamstring? Can you open this out?
Raj?
I mean, yeah, it's a great question. I mean, it could have just been a quick tweak. It depends on when he felt it. Also, was it on a reaching? Was it when he was reaching for a ball? Was it when he was running? I mean, how severe was the ping? There's so many different variables here, right? And so it's quite hard to say what a ping correlates to.
I mean, for me, look, it's an absolute nodder. Well, he actually said it was pinging. It was pinging.
Pinging.
So
in that case,
pinging to me suggests maybe there was maybe a little throbbing, potentially some fatigue-related cramp. Of course, the sending off of Pascal Stark, seeing Patrick Bamford drop a little bit deeper. We're talking about different body movements, different stride patterns, different styles of play, coming off different actions, different intensity runs. So maybe that did have an impact. But to suggest anything that he has an injury, for me at this moment is just crap. We're listening to somebody muttering a couple of words under his breath before he went live on air, and people are just reading too much into that.
So this is almost like a classic case. Exactly what I say at the start of each of these episodes is cutting through the rumours, misinformation, fake news. This is probably overplayed, and the data as well. You kind of have said on other podcasts, but we'll bring it here as well. Patrick Bamford's quite a hardy player. He doesn't often miss out on games.
I mean, yeah, we had he was managing an ongoing calf issue for around about 3, 4, 5 games last season, fatigue related, a lot of discomfort in there. Played through it, soldiered on, and look, I mean, come team news tomorrow on Thursday, Marcelo Bielsa may come out and say, yeah, Patrick Bamford's injured, there's a hamstring problem, but we're certainly not reading or getting anything from him saying, the back of my thigh is pinging. I'm not having any of that crap. Like, I'm not. I'm not even getting involved in it.
This one is this one that you'd ignore as well, Raj?
Yeah, I mean, based off that information, if you can't use that as any indicator of anything. He may or may not have an hamstring issue, but to go off some microphone utterance under the breath and then extrapolate it into this is a little ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, we've said plenty of things under when the mic's off that people should or shouldn't hear. So,
correct.
If they broadcast that, like, our certain feelings towards players, then they might say that they were, supposed to be out or whatever. The final thing that I wanted to bring to attention, and a lot of people discuss this kind of going into each game week, and that they'll go, why is this certain player flagged? What's the reason for it? And with the international breaks, because of quarantining, Buendia, Martinez are two that are flagged. And some people benched Martinez because they thought, well, it's just one game week, we'll handle that. And suddenly they're panicked again that he might miss a second game week. So why aren't they just ready to go straight back into the team, Ben?
First and foremost, take whatever that flag system pretends to be with a pinch of salt, because it's absolutely garbage. And so much to suffice to say that I actually checked on Sunday what it actually put for Harvey Elliot, because I was half expecting to see a return to play of 75%. So look, take it with a pinch of salt, because they are often updated with little or no understanding of the situation, of the circumstances of the injury, or otherwise. With regards to Buendia, Martinez, and the three guys from Tottenham, Lo Celso, Davinson Sanchez, and one other guy, Christian Romero, all 5 players are training in a green country, Croatia. They have had their representatives from the clubs, from the medical department, sports science teams, training with them. So they've been going through normal day-to-day training sessions as they would back here. The only way, a rationale behind their flagging is, well, one, they're not in this country for the moment, and they will not fly back until the day before the game. So, you can never be 100% certain in the modern era of what's happening logistically with flights and with amber lists and, COVID and so on and so forth. But, ultimately, if there aren't any, setbacks, any issues, it will come down to those individual managers and Dean Smith and Nuno, and those discussions with those sports science department about whether those players are ready to play. But they're certainly not. They shouldn't be in any way, shape, or form too affected by the situation of training. Although again, it's hard to replicate that team environment, that highly charged testosterone environment of a training pitch when there's only a small handful of you there.
I mean, Raj, so no reason to expect them not to be back this weekend, or at least playing some part?
Yeah, I mean, I agree pretty much with what Ben said. There's really no pertinent reason outside of the uncertainty that comes with them being in Croatia and not with the team, right? That's likely why they were quote unquote flagged. But there's nothing that I've seen that would suggest that there's actually some sort of overt injury. It sounds like uncertainty here has been correlated into an uncertainty to potentially play. But if they're going to come back on Friday, everything checks out with the sports science team, and they'll probably go through a fitness test too when they get back as well, and they'll be assessed. So I don't see anything thus far that say that they won't play.
Well, that is the roundup then for the big discussion points of this game week going into game week 5. I hope you found that useful, and I hope that you do press that subscribe button, because we're releasing so much good content here on the channel. We've got so much good stuff lined up, and we'll be going through the international break as well when that happens. I'm not looking forward to it, if I'm honest. I don't like the international breaks, but we'll be continuing our great broadcast then as well. But for now, I'm going to say goodbye. I'm going to say to everybody, make sure not only to subscribe to us, but subscribe to Free CB Performance. Check out Raj's Twitter, check out his YouTube, just check out whatever the hell he does. Like Ben's shown you there, just go over to his great content. Check out the Premier Injuries website as well. Check out all our other YouTube videos as well, because obviously we've got the serious stuff here with some in-depth analysis of injuries, but we've also got the fun stuff with Fantasy Premier League asset discussion. But for now, I'm going to wish you the best of luck, going to wish you the best of health, and I'm going to say goodbye from all of us here on the Premier Injuries podcast.